1 second, she was just trying to escape a persistent creep at a crowded gala. The next, her lips were pressed against a stranger in a perfectly tailored suit. She thought it was a harmless distraction. She didn't know she had just kissed the city's most ruthless mafia boss. The Luminary Gala at the Waldorf Astoria was supposed to be a career-defining night for Harper Hayes. At 26, she was a junior financial auditor for a mid-tier firm, and scoring an invitation to the city's most exclusive charity event was her chance to network with Chicago's elite. She wore a borrowed emerald green silk gown and kept her posture rigid, nursing a single glass of champagne for over an hour. It was supposed to be a night of polite handshakes and business cards. Instead, it turned into a nightmare the moment Braden walked in. Braden was a senior partner at a rival firm, and he had spent the last 3 months refusing to accept that Harper wasn't interested. Tonight, the open bar had emboldened him. For 45 minutes he shadowed her through the opulent ballroom, his hand repeatedly finding the small of her back, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her neck. Desperate to lose him, Harper slipped through a set of heavy mahogany doors, leaving the dazzling chandeliers and string quartet behind. She found herself in a dimly lit private corridor reserved for the hotel's VIPs. The thick Persian carpet swallowed to the sound of her heels, but she could still hear the heavy, irregular thud of Braden's footsteps pushing through the doors behind her. "Harper, come on," Braden slurred, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "Stop playing hard to get." Panic flared in her chest. The corridor was a dead end, terminating at a set of guarded double doors. Standing directly in front of those doors was a man. He was tall, his broad shoulders filling out a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit. He was turned slightly away, speaking in a low, authoritative murmur to a massive guard in a trench coat. Braden's footsteps were getting closer. Harper's mind raced, adrenaline hijacking her common sense. She needed Braden to leave her alone, permanently. She needed a shield. Without thinking, Harper lunged forward. She grabbed the lapels of the stranger's charcoal suit, spun him around, and pressed her lips forcefully against his. For a fraction of a second, the man went completely rigid, like a statue carved from ice. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, praying the stranger would play along. To her absolute shock, he didn't push her away. Instead, a large, calloused hand came up to grip the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her updo. His mouth parted, taking control of the kiss with a devastating, dominant intensity. He tasted of expensive scotch, dark tobacco, and something inherently dangerous. When Harper finally broke the kiss, gasping for air, the world around her had frozen. Braden was standing 10 feet away, all the color drained from his face. He wasn't looking at Harper. He was staring at the man she was clinging to, his jaw slack with sheer, unadulterated terror. Braden stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, before turning and sprinting back into the ballroom. Harper exhaled a shaky breath of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping back from the stranger. "I am so sorry. He wouldn't leave me alone, and I just—" Her words died in her throat. The dim lighting shifted, illuminating the stranger's face. He possessed a brutally handsome, aristocratic bone structure, but his eyes were the color of a winter sky, cold, piercing, and entirely devoid of mercy. A faint, silvery scar jagged across his left jawline. It wasn't just him. 3 other men had materialized from the shadows, and every single one of them had a silenced pistol drawn and aimed directly at Harper's chest. "Hold," the stranger commanded. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. Instantly, the weapons were lowered, though the men remained tense, their eyes locked on Harper like wolves cornering a deer. The man reached into his breast pocket, slowly pulling out a pristine white silk handkerchief. He dabbed a smudge of her coral lipstick from the corner of his mouth, his icy eyes never leaving hers. "Do you make a habit of throwing yourself at men in dark hallways, Tesoro?" he asked, his tone dangerously smooth. I made a mistake," Harper stammered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run. "I'm sorry. Have a good night." She didn't wait for a response. She hiked up the skirt of her emerald dress and bolted down the hallway, bursting through a side exit and sprinting into the freezing Chicago night. She didn't stop running until she was locked inside her cramped apartment, her lungs burning, telling herself it was just a bizarre encounter with an arrogant billionaire and his overzealous security. She was wrong. The next morning, Harper sat in her kitchen, hands trembling as she stared at the screen of her laptop. Her best friend, Lily, had texted her an urgent link to an underground news blog. Syndicate Boss surfaces at Luminary Gala. Below the headline was a blurry, zoomed-in photograph of the man she had kissed. His name was Dominic Russo. He was 32 years old and the undisputed head of the Russo crime syndicate. He controlled the docks, the underground casinos, and a massive money-laundering network stretching from Chicago to Palermo. The article detailed his ruthless ascension to power, noting that he had personally orchestrated the violent dismantling of the rival Irish faction just 6 months prior. He was a ghost, a myth, a man who ordered executions over morning espresso, and Harper had just grabbed him by the lapels and shoved her tongue down his throat. She slammed the laptop shut, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. She was a nobody, an auditor who bought her coffee at a corner bodega and stressed over student loans. She had assaulted the most feared mafia boss alive. Surely a man like Dominic Russo wouldn't care about a random, panicked woman at a party. He would brush it off. He would forget her. But in Dominic Russo's world, nothing was ever forgotten, and everything had a price. For 3 days, Harper existed in a state of suffocating paranoia. Every time a car idled too long outside her apartment building, she flinched. Every time her office phone rang, her stomach twisted into knots. By the 4th day, she began to relax. No men in trench coats kicked down her door. Braden had conveniently transferred to his firm's London office, disappearing from Chicago overnight, a detail Harper tried very hard not to think about. She convinced herself she had slipped through the cracks. On Friday evening, a torrential downpour washed over the city. Harper stayed late at the office, drowning herself in tax spreadsheets to avoid the empty silence of her apartment. By the time she packed up her briefcase, it was past 10 o'clock. The corporate building was deserted, the long rows of cubicles cast in deep shadows. She rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the concrete. The echo of her heels sounded too loud. As she approached her beat-up Honda Civic, she froze. Parked diagonally across her exit path was a sleek, black Cadillac Escalade, its engine purring softly. The windows were heavily tinted. Harper gripped her car keys, her knuckles turning white. She turned on her heel to head back to the elevator, but a massive figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking her path. It was the same trench-coated guard from the hallway. Enzo. "Miss Hayes," Enzo said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a verbal The boss would like a word. The rear door of the Escalade clicked open. Harper's legs felt like lead. She knew screaming would be useless. The garage was a tomb, and these men were professionals. Trembling, she walked toward the vehicle and peered inside. Dominic Russo sat in the plush leather seat, an open file folder resting on his lap. The ambient light from the dashboard cast sharp shadows over his scarred jaw. He looked even more imposing than she remembered, exuding a lethal, quiet authority. "Get in," he commanded softly. Harper obeyed, sliding into the seat opposite him. The door shut behind her with a heavy, final thud, trapping her in a space that smelled of rich leather and Dominic's intoxicating, smoky cologne. "Harper Hayes," Dominic read from the file, not looking up. "Graduated magna cum laude, 6 figures in debt, no criminal record, mother in a care facility in Ohio. You live a remarkably mundane life, Miss Hayes." "What do you want?" Harper's voice cracked. "I apologized for the other night. It was an accident. I didn't know who you were." Dominic finally looked up, closing the file. His slate-gray eyes pinned her in place. "Your ignorance is irrelevant. Your actions, however, have created a significant complication." He reached into the folder and tossed a glossy 8x10 photograph onto the seat beside her. Harper looked down and gasped. It was a high-resolution photo of their kiss in the hallway. From the angle, it looked passionate, desperate, and entirely consensual. "That photograph," Dominic said, his voice deadly calm, "was taken by a spy working for Victor Romano. Victor controls the South Side faction. He has been looking for a weakness to exploit before he makes a move on my territory. You, Miss Hayes, have just painted a massive target on your own back. As of yesterday morning, the underground believes you are my secret mistress." Harper felt the blood drain from her face. No, you have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I'm nobody." Dominic let out a dark, hollow chuckle. "In my world, perception is reality. Victor doesn't care who you actually are. He only cares that I let you get close enough to touch me. He will take you. He will torture you to get to me. And then he will leave you in pieces in the Chicago River." A wave of nausea washed over Harper. The sterile air of the Escalade suddenly felt suffocating. "Please," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I didn't mean to do this. How do I fix it? I'll leave town. I'll disappear." "Victor has eyes at the airports and train stations. If you run, his men will intercept you before you cross state lines." Dominic leaned forward, the sheer force of his presence consuming the small space. "There is only one way you survive this." Harper stared at him, paralyzed by the sheer gravity of her situation. "How?" "You lean into the lie," Dominic said smoothly. "Victor operates on leverage. He will try to use you to draw me out. I need a traitor in my ranks exposed, and Victor is the key to finding him. You are going to play the role of my devoted, beloved woman. You will move into my estate tonight. You will attend events by my side. You will smile, you will hold my hand, and you will convince Victor Romano that you are the most precious thing in my life." "You want me to be bait?" Harper breathed, horrified. "I want you to be convincing," Dominic corrected sharply. "If you play your part, my men will ensure no harm comes to you, and we will crush Victor within the month. If you refuse—" He trailed off, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "If you refuse, I leave you in this garage, and Victor's men will have you before morning." It was a devil's bargain. Give herself over to a ruthless syndicate boss, or die at the hands of a rival cartel. Harper looked at the photograph of the kiss, the single, reckless moment that had set her life on fire. She looked at Dominic, reading the unwavering, cold calculation in his eyes. He wasn't asking her. He was giving her a choice on how she wanted to face her doom. "Okay," Harper whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Okay, I'll do it." Dominic's expression didn't soften, but a dangerous spark ignited in his grey eyes. "Good girl." He tapped on the glass partition, dividing them from the driver. "Take us home, Enzo." As the heavy SUV pulled out of the garage and merged into the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, Harper stared out the window. She was no longer a junior auditor. She was now the property of the Russo Syndicate, stepping into a violent, blood-soaked world from which there was no return. And as Dominic's warm, powerful hand reached across the seat to firmly grip her trembling fingers, a rehearsal for the watchful eyes of the city, she realized the most terrifying part wasn't the danger. It was how perfectly her hand fit in his. The gates of the Lake Forest estate loomed like the entrance to a beautiful, terrifying fortress. Harper Hayes stared through the tinted glass of the Escalade as heavy wrought-iron doors swung open, revealing a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by manicured hedges and armed guards. She was no longer a civilian. She was an asset. A pawn in a deadly game of chess between Dominic Russo and Victor Romano. For the first 2 weeks, her existence was a masterclass in psychological whiplash. By day, she was sequestered in a lavish guest suite, attended to by a silent housekeeper named Maria and a stylist named Penelope. By night, she was paraded through Chicago's elite underground. Dominic bought her diamonds that felt like heavy collars and silk dresses that fit like a second skin. They attended private gallery openings, illicit casino nights, and exclusive underground dinners. Every public moment was an immaculate performance. Dominic would pull her close by the waist, his thumb tracing the curve of her hip. He would whisper dark, meaningless Italian phrases into her ear just to make her shiver, ensuring every watcher believed they were madly in love. But the moment the car doors closed on the way home, the warmth would vanish. He became stone again, analyzing the room, tracking his enemies in silence. "You are fidgeting, Harper," Dominic observed one evening in his dimly lit study. He was pouring a glass of expensive Macallan, his broad back turned to her. "I am not a trained operative, Dominic," she snapped, her frustration finally bubbling over the brim. "Victor's men were taking pictures of us at the restaurant tonight. I can feel them watching me. I feel like I'm suffocating." Dominic turned, his icy grey eyes locking onto hers. He walked slowly across the ornate Persian rug, stopping mere inches from her. The faint, silvery scar on his jaw caught the amber light of the desk lamp. "Fear is a liability," he murmured, his voice a low, vibrating rumble. "Victor feeds on it. If he smells your terror, he will strike." "How am I supposed to pretend I belong in this world of blood and bullets?" she demanded, looking up at him, her heart hammering. Dominic reached out, his calloused fingers gently gripping her chin, forcing her to hold his gaze. "You do not pretend to belong to the world, Harper. You pretend to belong to me. When you are with me, no one can touch you. You need to believe that." For a suspended moment, the air between them thickened. His touch wasn't a performance for an audience. They were entirely alone. Harper felt a treacherous, wild flutter in her chest. The dangerous Mafia Don was supposed to terrify her, but all she could focus on was the intense, protective heat radiating from his large frame. Before she could process the sudden shift, Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Enzo burst into the study, his face grim and pale. "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic dropped his hand from Harper's chin, instantly transforming back into the ruthless syndicate leader. "What is it, Enzo?" "It's Harrison," Enzo reported, referring to Dominic's second-in-command for the North Side territory. "We intercepted an encrypted burner phone transmission. Harrison has been feeding our shipment schedules and security rotations to Romano. He's the mole." Dominic's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Where is he right now?" "He's managing the floor security for the underground diamond auction at the St. Regis tonight. Victor is confirmed to be attending." "Perfect," Dominic said, a lethal, terrifying calm washing over him. He turned back to Harper, his eyes dark, sweeping over her frame. "Go tell Penelope to put you in the red dress, Tesoro. Tonight, we trap a rat." Harper's hands trembled as she sat at the vanity 30 minutes later. Penelope pinned her dark hair into an elegant cascade and painted her lips a deep, matte crimson. The red dress was a masterpiece of danger. A plunging neckline with a dangerous slit that exposed a custom holster strapped to her upper thigh. Dominic had insisted she carry a small, pearl-handled derringer. "Just in case," he had whispered, sliding the cold metal against her warm skin in a gesture that was overwhelmingly intimate. The ride to the St. Regis was completely silent. Rain lashed against the armored windows of the Escalade. Harper stared at Dominic, noting the sharp, predatory set of his jaw. He was a man preparing for absolute war. The penthouse of the St. Regis was a glittering sea of corruption. Corrupt politicians and cartel bosses mingled under massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne, navigating around heavily armed bodyguards stuffed into bespoke tuxedos. As soon as they entered, the room's atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed. Eyes tracked their every move. Dominic placed a possessive, iron-tight hand on the small of Harper's back, guiding her through the treacherous crowd. "Smile, Harper," he ordered under his breath. "Show them you are completely untouchable." She forced a brilliant, dazzling smile, leaning her weight into his solid warmth. Across the room, standing near an illuminated display of raw diamonds, was Victor Romano. He was older, with slicked-back silver hair and a cruel reptilian face. Beside him stood Harrison, Dominic's trusted lieutenant. Victor's eyes locked onto Harper, a predatory gleam dancing in his dark pupils. He whispered something to Harrison, who paled and nodded rapidly. The trap was set, but Harper suddenly realized a terrifying truth. They were walking straight into the jaws of a monster. Dominic didn't hesitate. He led Harper directly toward the lion's den, his stride measured, commanding, and totally devoid of fear. As they approached, the crowd naturally parted, intimidated by the sheer gravity of Dominic Russo's presence. "Dominic," Victor purred, spreading his hands in a gesture of fake warmth. "A pleasure to see you stepping out of the shadows. And who is this stunning creature? You have kept her hidden for far too long." "Victor," Dominic replied, his voice a flat, deadened drawl. He did not offer his hand. "This is Harper, my fiancé." Harper's breath hitched at the word. Fiancé. It was a new addition to the script, designed to raise the stakes to a boiling point. Victor's gaze slithered over Harper, making her skin crawl with disgust. "Charmed," he sneered. "It would be a tragedy if anything were to happen to such a beautiful investment. The only tragedy tonight, Victor, will be the sudden drop in your life expectancy if you look at her like that again," Dominic stated quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison shifted nervously on his feet, his hand inching instinctively toward his jacket. Harper saw the frantic movement. Her pulse hammered against her eardrums. She remembered Dominic's lesson in the study. She wasn't just bait anymore. She was part of the game. Dominic, Harper purred, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. She reached up, trailing a manicured finger down his lapel, playing the devoted Mafia wife. The air in here is incredibly stale. Perhaps Harrison could fetch us some fresh champagne. She locked eyes with the traitor, her gaze piercing and knowing. Harrison froze, looking desperately at Victor. The dynamics of the room had just violently snapped. The Northside boss knew he had been made. The air in the St. Regis penthouse grew razor-thin, suffocating the opulence in an instant. Harper's demand hung in the space between the men like a lit fuse. Harrison's face completely drained of color, his eyes darting frantically between his current boss and the rival who had bought his loyalty. Victor Romano's cruel, confident smile finally faltered. He recognized the brutal shift in the board. Dominic didn't just suspect Harrison. He was parading his knowledge in front of the city's criminal elite, daring Victor to make a move. "Get the lady a drink, Harrison," Dominic commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the heavy weight of an executioner's axe. Harrison took a step backward, his hand trembling violently as it hovered over his suit jacket. "Dominic, I swear to God—" "Save your breath," Dominic interrupted coldly. In the span of a single chaotic heartbeat, the gilded ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. Harrison panicked and drew his weapon, but he didn't aim at Dominic. Knowing he couldn't beat the Don's lethal reflexes, he aimed the muzzle directly at Harper's chest, intending to use her as a human shield to escape. "Nobody move!" Harrison screamed, grabbing Harper's bare arm and yanking her violently toward him. The red silk of her dress tore slightly at the shoulder. Screams echoed off the marble floors as wealthy guests dropped to the ground. Crystal shattered as Enzo and Dominic's men drew their firearms, but they were frozen in place. Harrison had his gun pressed tight against Harper's temple. Dominic stood entirely still. His grey eyes, usually so calculated and cold, blazed with an untamed, apocalyptic fury. It wasn't the look of a mafia boss losing a strategic asset. It was the frantic, terrifying look of a man watching his world burn to the ground. "Let her go, Harrison," Dominic said. The calmness in his voice was far more terrifying than a shout. "You release her right now, and I will only put one bullet in your skull instead of 10. "Victor promised me the North Side," Harrison shouted, backing towards the service elevators, dragging a struggling Harper with him. "You're weak, Dominic. You let a woman soften you. You're unfit to rule." Victor Romano, flanked by his own armed men, laughed from the safety of the diamond display. "He's right, Dominic. You brought a civilian into a war zone. This is your kingdom crumbling before your eyes." Harper's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. The cold, unforgiving steel of Harrison's gun dug painfully into her skin. But as she looked at Dominic, at the sheer, unadulterated terror masked perfectly behind his rage, she realized the truth. The long nights, the protective touches, the heated glances in the dark. It hadn't been an act. He actually cared for her. And she, God help her, cared for this ruthless, broken man. She was not going to die a helpless victim in a borrowed red dress. Harper remembered the pearl-handled derringer strapped to her thigh. Harrison was tall, but his grip on her was awkward, his panicked attention divided entirely between Dominic's advancing men and the elevator doors behind him. Taking a sharp, trembling breath, Harper suddenly went entirely limp, dropping all her body weight toward the floor in a dead faint. The unexpected dead weight caught Harrison completely off guard. He stumbled forward, cursing loudly, his grip slipping from her arm to her hair. In that split second of distraction, Harper reached beneath the slit of her crimson dress, her fingers finding the cold, familiar grip of the small pistol. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the paperwork, the boring auditing job, or her quiet life in the suburbs. She aimed upward and pulled the trigger. The loud crack of the derringer was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet tore straight through Harrison's shoulder, shattering his collarbone. He shrieked in agony, dropping his weapon as he fell violently backward onto the marble. Before Harrison even hit the floor, Dominic was moving. He closed the distance like a shadow, his own weapon drawn. He didn't fire at Harrison. He fired directly at Victor Romano. The ballroom descended into an absolute bloodbath. Gunfire shattered the crystal chandeliers, plunging the room into chaotic, strobe-lit darkness. Dominic grabbed Harper by the waist, tackling her behind a heavy, bulletproof marble pillar as bullets chewed through the plaster directly above their heads. "Are you hit?" Dominic yelled over the deafening roar of automatic fire. His hands were frantic as they checked her body, smearing Harrison's blood across her red silk dress. "I'm fine. I'm okay," she gasped, her hands shaking violently as she dropped the empty derringer onto the carpet. Dominic pressed his forehead against hers in the darkness, his broad chest heaving. "You reckless, beautiful fool," he breathed fiercely. "You could have been killed." "You told me I belonged to you," Harper fiercely replied, grabbing the lapels of his suit, just like she had on the night they first met in that hotel corridor. "I wasn't going to let him take me away." A heavy, intimate silence fell over them, despite the frantic gunfire echoing on the other side of the pillar. Dominic stared down at her, the mask of the syndicate boss completely shattered. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a performance for the cameras. It was desperate, bruising, and tasted of gunpowder, adrenaline, and absolute devotion. "Enzo!" Dominic barked, breaking the kiss but keeping Harper shielded with his large body. "Clear!" Enzo's gruff voice rang out across the room. Dominic pulled Harper up. The penthouse was totally destroyed. Victor Romano lay dead near the shattered diamond cases, his ambition permanently silenced. Harrison was bleeding out on the carpet, begging for mercy. Dominic didn't even look at the traitor as he fired a single, final shot. The war was over. Dominic holstered his weapon and looked at Harper, his expression softening into something she had never seen before. True vulnerability. "The threat is gone. I will have Enzo drive you to the airport right now. You have a new identity waiting. You are free to go back to your life, Harper." Harper looked at the carnage around her. She looked at the man who had dragged her into hell, only to realize he was the only place in the world she felt entirely safe. She stepped over the shattered glass, reaching out to weave her fingers perfectly through his. "I already told you, Dominic," she whispered softly, wiping a smudge of dirt from his scarred jaw. "I'm not running." Dominic Russo, the most feared mafia boss alive, smiled. He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her as police sirens began to wail in the distance. The civilian auditor was dead. The queen of the syndicate had arrived. Harper's journey from a terrified accountant to the fearless queen of the Russo syndicate proves that sometimes the most dangerous mistakes lead directly to our true destiny. Did you love this intense, blood-pumping mafia romance? If you want to see more thrilling stories of danger, betrayal, and passion, smash that. like button, share this video with your fellow romance junkies, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a wild twist.